Have you ever noticed how people who consider themselves more conscious, more awakened to the world's problems are often those who suffer most socially? While you question rampant consumerism, your friends continue celebrating every new purchase on Instagram. While you worry about social media manipulation, your family spends hours scrolling infinite feeds without noticing how they're being programmed. There's something deeply disturbing happening. The more awakened you become to society's contradictions, the more socially isolated you feel. And this isn't accidental. It's a phenomenon that's intensifying exponentially, potentially reaching a critical point as early as 2026, when those who insist on remaining conscious may find themselves completely marginalized from the dominant social fabric. This isn't a conspiracy theory or an apocalyptic prediction. It's the observation of a pattern already in motion, accelerated by the same technologies that promised to connect and liberate us. Imagine for a moment the situation of someone who 15 years ago tried to warn about the dangers of social media, algorithmic manipulation, privacy, erosion. These people were seen as paranoid, technophobic, disconnected from reality. Today, their predictions have proven not only correct, but even conservative, given the magnitude of transformation we've witnessed. And yet, paradoxically, it's these same people conscious of the problems who find it hardest to navigate socially in a world that has fully embraced what they warned against. History teaches us that being right about society's problems is rarely a social advantage. Socrates was executed for asking inconvenient questions. Galileo was persecuted for defending truths that contradicted established consensus. More recently, scientists who warned about climate change in the 1970 seconds and 1980 seconds were ridiculed and marginalized, even when their data was incontestable. The pattern is always the same. Society punishes those who question its fundamental illusions, especially when these illusions are necessary to maintain the functioning of the dominant economic and social system. But what makes our current situation particularly unique is the speed and depth with which digital technology is reshaping not just how we relate, but how we define reality itself. We live in an era where algorithms determine what we see, think, and feel, creating customized reality bubbles for each individual. In this context, being awakened doesn't simply mean having access to different information, but possessing the capacity to see the mechanisms by which these realities are constructed and manipulated. It's like being the only sober person at a party where everyone is under the influence of a drug that makes them feel euphoric and connected, while you observe the spectacle with painful clarity. The fundamental problem is that our economy and social structure increasingly depend on the unconscious participation of masses in systems of consumption, attention, and digital validation. Those who refuse to participate, who question these systems, or try to live according to different values, find themselves progressively excluded, not just from economic opportunities, but from basic social connections. It's impossible to maintain deep relationships when you're constantly pointing to the matrix while everyone around you is happy living inside it. This dynamic is intensifying at an alarming rate. Each passing year, more aspects of social life migrate to digital platforms controlled by algorithms. Romantic relationships are mediated by applications that gamify romance. Professional careers depend on digital presence and personal branding. Even basic activities like buying food, socializing, or learning about local events require participation in digital ecosystems that collect data, manipulate behaviors, and reinforce specific consumption patterns. What we observe isn't simply a generational divide or a matter of technological adaptation. It's a fundamental divergence in how different groups of people perceive and navigate reality. On one side, we have those who have fully embraced digital mediation of human experience, finding in it convenience, connection, and meaning. On the other, we have those who maintain a critical perspective on these transformations, but who pay a growing social price for this consciousness. The question becomes even more complex when we consider that many of those who consider themselves awakened may actually be trapped in their own reality bubbles, just different from the dominant ones. The internet is full of communities that see themselves as bearers of special truths, whether about conspiracy, alternative spirituality, radical politics, or unconventional life philosophies. These communities offer a type of refuge for those who feel alienated from mainstream culture, but frequently create their own systems of dogmatic thinking and social isolation. True awakening, perhaps, isn't adhering to any of these specific worldviews, but developing the capacity to consciously navigate between different constructed realities, recognizing both their potential and their limitations. This requires a sophisticated form of emotional and social intelligence that allows a person to maintain their convictions and critical perceptions without completely isolating themselves from the social world around them. But this navigation is becoming increasingly difficult. The algorithms that govern our digital interactions are designed to maximize engagement, and engagement is most easily obtained through polarization and confirmation of pre-existing biases. This means digital platforms have an economic incentive to divide society into increasingly isolated and radicalized tribes. Those who try to maintain a nuanced perspective, who refuse to align completely with any specific tribe, find themselves without place in this ecosystem. The situation is further complicated by the fact that many of the concerns of those who consider themselves awakened are in fact legitimate and urgent. Issues related to digital manipulation, privacy erosion, social media's impact on mental health, growing economic inequalities, environmental and social crises are real problems requiring attention and action. Ignoring these issues may be socially more comfortable, but it's intellectually dishonest and potentially dangerous for humanity's future. So we arrive at our era's central paradox. Those who are capable of seeing and articulating society's most urgent problems are systematically marginalized by the very social structures that would need to be transformed to solve these problems. It's as if we're on a sinking ship, but the only passengers who perceive the danger are prevented from communicating with the crew because their message is considered too disturbing for other passengers' morale. This phenomenon isn't just a sociological curiosity. It has profound implications for humanity's capacity to face the complex challenges ahead. If the most conscious and critical voices are systematically silenced or marginalized, how can we develop effective solutions for problems that require precisely this kind of clear, uncompromised perspective? The date 2026 isn't arbitrary. It's approximately when various technological and social trends will converge to dramatically intensify these dynamics. Artificial intelligence integration into social media will make behavioral manipulation more sophisticated and subtle. Virtual and augmented reality will create additional layers of digital mediation of experience. Social credit systems, already being experimented with in some countries, may expand to include not just financial behavior, but social and ideological conformity. In this context, those who insist on questioning, on maintaining critical perspectives, on living according to values that don't align with the dominant digital system's imperatives, may find themselves not just socially isolated, but actively penalized by algorithms that govern access to jobs, relationships, services, and opportunities. But perhaps the real question isn't how to avoid this marginalization, but how to redefine it as a form of creative resistance. Throughout history, marginalized groups have frequently developed alternative forms of social organization, distinct value systems, and innovative cultural practices that eventually influenced or even transformed dominant culture. Let me pause for a moment to ask, do you also feel this growing tension between your awareness of our world's problems and your need for social belonging? This sensation that the more you see the contradictions around you, the harder it becomes to maintain meaningful relationships with those who prefer not to see? I know it can be isolating to carry these perceptions, especially when they make us question not just the world, but our place in it. If this feeling resonates with you, share your experience in the comments. It can be as simple as writing, "I feel this isolation when." Your honesty might be exactly what someone needs to read today, to realize they're not alone in this seemingly solitary journey of consciousness. The most interesting possibility is that those who are marginalized today for their critical consciousness may be unknowingly developing the skills and perspectives that will be essential for navigating the emerging world. While most people adapt to realities created by algorithms, the awakened are learning to live with less digital mediation, to develop more authentic relationships, to find meaning in sources that don't depend on constant external validation. This could be a disguised evolutionary advantage. In a world where artificial intelligence will assume many basic cognitive functions, the most valuable human skills may be precisely those the awakened are being forced to develop: independent critical thinking, capacity to tolerate ambiguity and uncertainty, resistance to manipulation, ability to form deep human connections without technological mediation. The irony is that those seen today as socially maladjusted may actually be better prepared for the future than those who have adapted perfectly to the present. This isn't necessarily consoling, because the transition will likely be difficult and painful for everyone, but it suggests that the current suffering of the awakened may not be just a useless sacrifice, but part of an adaptation process to conditions that haven't fully arrived yet. What does this mean for those who find themselves in this position? First, it may be necessary to accept that social isolation may be temporary, but also inevitable in certain phases of great historical transformations. Second, it may be useful to focus on building small communities of people who share similar perspectives, creating support networks that don't depend on dominant social structures. Third, it's important to develop practices and skills that offer meaning and purpose independent of external social recognition. Perhaps the most important question isn't how to avoid marginalization, but how to use it creatively. How can outsiders become innovators? How can the perspective of those outside the system offer solutions that those immersed in it cannot see? How can the suffering of consciousness be transformed into fuel for positive change? History suggests that great social transformations frequently begin at the margins, with people who were forced to develop alternative ways of living and thinking. Civil rights movements, scientific revolutions, artistic and philosophical innovations often emerged from groups that were initially excluded or marginalized by dominant society. If this is true, then those who today feel isolated by their critical consciousness may be participating unknowingly in the gestation of future forms of social and individual organization. Their current marginalization may be the price of being a few steps ahead in the evolution of human consciousness. This doesn't make the suffering less real or less difficult. Being right about society's problems doesn't offer immediate comfort when you're struggling to maintain relationships or find your place in the world. But it can offer a larger perspective on the meaning of these difficulties. The final question, perhaps, is how to maintain hope and humanity amid this transition. How to remain open to growth and connection, even when familiar structures of society seem to be dissolving. How to cultivate love and compassion, both for those who sleep and those who have awakened, recognizing that we're all navigating unknown waters. The answer may lie in understanding that truly awakening isn't just about seeing the world's problems, but about developing the wisdom to respond to these problems with creativity, love, and courage. It's not about being right about what's wrong, but about consciously participating in creating something better. If these reflections have touched something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't been able to fully articulate, know that you're not alone in this seemingly solitary journey. By subscribing to the channel, you'll connect with a community of people who, like you, are consciously navigating the complexities of our time, seeking not just to understand the transformations we're experiencing, but to creatively participate in shaping the emerging future. Each week, we explore together the great questions that define our era, offering not simple answers, but perspectives that can illuminate your own path of discovery and growth. This is an ongoing conversation about how to live with wisdom, authenticity, and purpose in times of radical change. Subscribe so we can continue this essential exploration about what it means to be human in a transforming world and how we can consciously contribute to the emergence of wiser and more compassionate ways of existing together on this planet. without starting any wars, without assassinating anybody, no guillotines in City Square. So that's one of the hopeful examples of how people can, just by changing the story, also change the world. I mean, the idea that stories...
I think you're converting people to your religion right now.
The idea that stories kind of fuel history, there is a positive promise there that, you know, if it's all about power, the only way to change power structures is with violence. But if it's really, at least in part, about the stories people believe, then potentially by talking with people and changing the stories in which they believe, you can change the world. The thing is that not in a dictatorship, in a democracy, newspapers and other news outlets are liable for their decisions. Like if the editor of the New York Times decides to publish some conspiracy theory or fake news at the front page of the New York Times, he cannot hide or she cannot hide behind the argument, but free speech. There are some people who believe it's true, so I put it on the front page of the New York Times. No, your job as editor is not just to put something random there or something that would please people. Your job is to fact check and to take responsibility for these decisions and to make sure that if you publish something on the front page of the New York Times, you better be sure that this is accurate and this is responsible. And if you don't know how to do it, then you're in the wrong job.